It always begins the same way, a breaking news alert flashing across every screen, a sensational headline gripping the public's attention. Officials scrambling, desperate to control the narrative. And yet, despite their efforts, the public is left with more questions than answers. This time, the chaos originated in Houston, Texas. A high-stakes ICE operation, one that was meant to dismantle a powerful smuggling ring, had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. This was no small-time outfit. This was a well-connected, highly sophisticated network, one that had been funneling illegal migrants into the U.S. for years. Law enforcement had planned a decisive takedown, a defining moment that would send shockwaves through the criminal underworld. But instead of victory, they were met with emptiness. The compound, where traffickers were supposed to be, was completely abandoned. No suspects, no arrests, no trace of their shadowy operations. Every piece of incriminating evidence erased, meticulously, methodically, almost as if they had been warned ahead of time. Coincidence? That was the word cautiously making its way through the initial reports. Perhaps ICE miscalculated, they said. Maybe the operation suffered from a last-minute miscommunication, an unfortunate lapse in timing. But for those who had been watching these cases unfold for years, those who understood the brutal, unspoken war behind illegal immigration, this didn't feel like an accident. It felt like something far more sinister. It felt like sabotage. By midday, the story had completely consumed the news cycle. Every television anchor had their own theory. Every commentator had a hot take. Some pointed fingers at ICE, calling them incompetent. Others hinted at a deeper conspiracy, one that stretched beyond local law enforcement, all the way to Washington. The kind of conspiracy where powerful figures pull strings from the shadows, ensuring that certain criminals remain untouchable. And then, the official statement dropped. Tom Homan, the former acting director of ICE, took to the airwaves. He was a man known for pulling no punches, delivering his words with blunt force honesty. There was no room for speculation in his message. No unnecessary theatrics. Just the cold, bitter truth. We have reason to believe this was an inside job. A pause. A silence so thick it seemed to stretch across the nation. The Department of Justice is launching a full-scale investigation. If there is someone within our government leaking information to criminal networks, they will be found. And they will be prosecuted. A strong statement. A declaration meant to restore public confidence. But for those who had seen too much, who had witnessed these stories vanish into bureaucratic black holes, it rang hollow. Because if history had taught anything, it was this. When a government investigation threatens the wrong people, the truth has a habit of disappearing. And that's exactly why John Solomon paid attention. For decades, he had been the kind of journalist who didn't just chase stories. He ripped them apart, dug through the filth, and unearthed the truths that most reporters wouldn't dare to touch. While mainstream media drowned in political agendas, Solomon had built a reputation for following the facts, wherever they led. Even when they led straight into Washington's darkest corridors. And now, watching Homan's broadcast from his D.C. office, Solomon felt it. That gut instinct, the one he had learned never to ignore. This wasn't just an operation gone wrong. This wasn't just bureaucratic incompetence. This was something bigger. Something calculated. And then, just as the broadcast ended, a new email appeared in his encrypted inbox. No subject line. No sender details. Just one chilling message. Asterisk, there's a traitor in the government. ICE operations are being sabotaged from the inside. If you want the truth, meet me. Asterisk. Solomon exhaled, his eyes locked on the screen. He had seen this before. Whistleblowers too afraid to speak openly. Secrets buried beneath layers of deception. But this time, something felt different. This wasn't just a leak. This was treason. And if there was one undeniable truth about exposing the wrong kind of secrets, it was this. Getting too close to the truth can get you killed. The streets were empty at this hour. Too empty. John Solomon had spent years navigating the dark corners of investigative journalism, shadowed alleyways, backroom deals, high-stakes meetings with informants. And if there was one thing he had learned, It was to trust his instincts. Right now, every nerve in his body was telling him something was off. The road leading to the abandoned warehouse was lined with derelict buildings, windows shattered, walls scarred with graffiti. No security cameras, no streetlights, no witnesses. If someone wanted to silence him, this was the perfect place to do it. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror for the 10th time in as many minutes. The black SUV that had been tailing him 2 blocks ago? Gone. But that didn't mean he wasn't being watched. He had taken a deliberately erratic route, looping through side streets, doubling back, taking unnecessary turns, anything to shake off a tail. But even now, the feeling of being hunted lingered. And as he pulled up to the warehouse, the question loomed. Was he about to uncover the truth? Or had he just walked into a trap? He had taken every precaution, doubling back, changing lanes, even lingering at green lights longer than necessary. But nothing. No sign of pursuit. Either he had successfully shaken his tail, or whoever had been tracking him had made a calculated decision to hang back, letting him walk straight into whatever waited ahead. That thought didn't sit well. A block away from the meeting spot, he killed the engine. The warehouse loomed in the near distance, a skeletal husk of rusted metal and decaying concrete. Once, it had been a thriving part of Houston's shipping industry, a cog in the machine of commerce. Now, it was nothing more than a forgotten relic, left to rot. The kind of place people didn't look twice at. Perfect for a clandestine meeting. Or an ambush. Stepping out, John's senses went into overdrive. Every sound, every shadow, it all felt too still, too expectant. Instinctively, his fingers brushed against the cold steel of the Glock holstered inside his jacket. He wasn't here to pick a fight, but if things went sideways, he wouldn't hesitate. The email had been clear. Come alone. That could mean 2 things. Either his source was terrified, or this was a setup. Either way, there was only one way to find out. Taking a steadying breath, he adjusted his collar and moved forward. The gravel under his shoes crunched too loudly, making him feel exposed. The warehouse door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, the darkness inside swallowing him whole. And the second he stepped inside, he knew something was off. The air was thick, heavy, saturated with the scent of rust, damp concrete, and something stale. The only sound was the faint buzzing of a flickering light overhead, casting erratic shadows across the cavernous space. This didn't feel like a simple meeting. This felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. Then movement. Near a stack of abandoned crates, a figure stood partially obscured by the dim light. Sam Whitaker. His silhouette barely visible, but his posture? Tense. Alert. On edge. His eyes darted past John, scanning the darkness behind him before finally locking onto his. You weren't followed? Sam's voice was low, urgent. John didn't blink. If I was, we'd both be dead already. A beat of silence. Talk. Sam exhaled sharply, running a shaking hand over his face. He looked like a man carrying too many secrets, a man who had seen too much. You were right, he said, voice tight. This isn't just some rogue leak. It's deliberate. It's controlled. And it's coming from the very top. John's jaw tightened. He folded his arms, waiting. They're not just obstructing IC, Sam continued. They're crippling it. Every operation, every raid, every coordinated effort to take these networks down, it's all being fed to the other side before we can act. His fists clenched. The people we're after? They're not just running. They're being protected. John's mind was already moving, connecting dots that had once seemed scattered and random. By who? Sam hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Fear? Doubt? John took a step forward. Who's behind it, Sam? Sam's mouth opened. Then the gunshot. A sharp, deafening crack shattered the silence. Sam's body jerked violently, his eyes going wide with shock as the bullet punched through his chest. His knees buckled, and he collapsed against the crate, his breath ragged, blood spreading rapidly across his shirt. John's instincts took over. He dropped low, reaching for his weapon, Not that it would do much good in a perfectly planned ambush. His eyes swept the shadows. The warehouse entrance? Empty. The shooter was hidden, precise, a professional. Sam made a choking sound. Half a gasp, half a gurgle. John moved fast, kneeling beside him. Blood pooled around them, soaking into the grime-covered floor. Sam's fingers twitched, weakly clutching at John's sleeve. His breath was coming in shallow bursts.
John leaned in.
Stay with me. Who did this? Who's feeding them? Sam's lips trembled. His voice was barely a whisper. Hi, Tim, Trong, Emile Kwa, Omar. And then his grip went slack. His body stilled. John felt the rush of adrenaline, the heat of anger, and beneath it, something colder. An understanding. This wasn't just about stopping a leak anymore. This was about survival. Then, a sound behind him. A footstep. Too close. His instinct screamed. Without thinking, he lunged forward, rolling behind a stack of crates just as another shot exploded through the air. The bullet sparked against the concrete, punching into the spot where he had knelt seconds ago. No hesitation.
Time to go.
He sprinted toward the nearest exit, weaving through the maze of rusted shelving units and abandoned machinery. Whoever was behind that trigger wasn't shooting to scare him off. They were shooting to kill. The second he burst into the alleyway, he didn't stop. He needed distance. He needed cover. He needed to figure out who the hell had just put a target on his back. But one thing was clear. Whoever had sent that email, whoever had lured him into this trap, had just made one very big mistake.